If you haven't heard yet, I just launched Future of Work Leaders, a global community of the world's top people leaders shaping the future of work and employee experience. If you are interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. Again, that is futureofworkleaders.com. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Diego Barreto. He's the CEO of a company called iFood. Diego, thank you for joining me.
Hello, from São Paulo to the world. Thanks very
Yeah.
much for the invitation, Jacob.
Yeah, happy to speak. So we're doing a little bit of work together with your CHRO, but I thought it would be really fun to have you come on and talk a little bit about leadership. Now, a lot of people listening to this probably are not familiar with iFood, although you're a massive company in Brazil. So why don't we just
Yeah,
start with a little bit of background info about the company? Who are you? What do you do? How many employees do you have?
that's great. So I will start by saying that iFood is an online to offline quick commerce platform. So basically, what we do is to sum, if you're in US, DoorDash, Instacart, and Toast. So that's what we do. So we integrated this online to offline world, bringing convenience to customers. We're a company founded 12 years ago. We became the first unicorn of Latin America. The company grew a lot in a very sustainable way. So we had only one round with investors, and
Wow.
the company has been, the company has been in a growth path since the beginning. Even though we didn't raise it more money, we found ways to generate a very strong cash flow here. The company in Brazil, Jacob, is well known for its focus on technology and artificial intelligence. Even though this looks like buzzwords, we can go into details to explain how this is so relevant to us. 6,000 people currently in Brazil, flexible work, strong culture, we don't negotiate it, and a very fun company.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, we'll get into all that stuff. And then why don't we start with background about you? So you could take us way back to how you grew up, how you were raised, and how did you eventually become the CEO of iFood? What was your path like?
Great. So I was born in the countryside of Brazil. My family is a family of entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs in a sense of the small ones in the countryside, not the ones that become some very popular in the country. I used it to go to my father and my grandfather to their companies since my like childhood. I don't know, 5, 6 years old, and I learned a lot with them. I moved to São Paulo. I got my undergrad in law. And why law? Because my father went to law school. So I believe that doing the same path would allow me to create a company as well. It didn't work. Actually, it was a bad decision. Uh, but instead of going back and starting business administration or something like this, I rather prefer to go to law and be very close to deals that would allow me to, at a certain point, build a bridge to make a career change. And that's what happened. After 3 years working as a lawyer, I did a career change to a company that I worked in its IPO, and for the next 10 years, I worked in large corporations here in Brazil, very large corporations. My career speed up a lot. And by 27, I was already a director, finance director. So I did the move, things worked well, but I started to see some movements in the world that was calling my attention. And that's when I decided to pursue an MBA. I went to Europe to study at IMD Business School. I came back to Brazil and started to work for, again, a very large company here in the country called Suzano, the largest pulp and paper company in the world.
Yeah, I know
Uh,
Sudano.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have a CHRO community of chief human resource officers. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Rafael is a part of it as well, and Susano just joined recently as well. So it's
Oh,
a
that's
very
great.
small
That's
world.
great. So I was there, but very convinced that the digital technology transformation was coming to Brazil. If you remember, this was 2015. 2014, Facebook was buying WhatsApp. Instagram was just being downloaded by you in your iPhone, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
actually, things were changing at that point in time. I started to get close to the startups community in Brazil, started to mentor startups. At a certain point, my phone rang, and the company is the controlling shareholder of iFood called Movely. And they say, okay, I mean, company is getting bigger. We need people with a sophisticated background in terms of management, but also with our behavior, with our culture. And we believe it's you. So I went there, got interviewed. They made me an offer. 40% of I was making at Suzano. So they said, if you want to come here, salary is low, equity is high, bear the risk, skin in the game, come. And I took the decision to come. 8 years after, I'm here as a
Wow.
CEO of the company.
So what made you take that role where it was a 40% smaller salary but higher equity?
Well, Jacob, my career speed up very fast. When, as I mentioned, at the 27 years old, I was already a director in one of the largest companies of Brazil. And I have to tell you that Brazil, it's a very like linear country. We are not like very entrepreneurial. We have most of the large companies here come from 40, 50, 6 years old ago. So I have to tell you that working in those companies here was great. I learned a lot. However, it was linear. I mean,
Yeah.
I was just keep repeating things. I mean, the companies were great enough to have bargaining power to
Copy and
reach great
paste.
deals. Yeah, I mean, competition in Brazil is not very dynamic. So my point in the end was, if I don't prepare myself to be a competitive human being in 30 years, 40 years, I mean, what I'm gonna be.
Yeah.
So the decision was very driven by the fact that I knew that a new economy was coming. And this new economy is the economy of the technology and all the ecosystems that were being created through through digital technology.
It makes sense. Yeah. Um, but you were never in that kind of a CEO role before. So how were you? Did you feel prepared to be the CEO of iFood? Or how did that feel?
Yeah. So Jacob, I have to tell that I mean I was the CFO. On my LinkedIn, Diego was the CFO.
Okay.
But the culture of iFood is not a very hierarchical culture. Actually, it's the opposite. So if you take a look on my journey here, I'm the person who managed communications since I arrived here. I manage public policy since the beginning. I founded a company here. So one of our main companies here, which is a meal voucher company, was founded by me. I managed P&Ls during this time. I was also the one responsible to create the social impact department. So what I'm trying to tell you is we are the kind of company that gives space to people that sit down, learn, and show the capacity to execute after learning, right? And that's my behavior. That's the behavior of many people here at iFood. So I have to tell you that I've been prepared by the environment. So
Mm.
when the chance came, I was, of course, I needed to learn a lot. I'm still learning a lot. But at that point in time, I was already relaxed in terms of the challenges that were in front of me.
Yeah. No, that's. It's always interesting to see how CEOs get in various roles. Sometimes people feel they're prepared. Sometimes they're not. It seems like in your case, you had a lot of different backgrounds and experiences that kind of made you ready for that role. What do you see the role of a CEO as actually being inside of an organization? So what a lot of people obviously know CEO stands for Chief Executive Officer, but what does that actually mean? What does that person do? So as CEO, and maybe more broadly as a leader, what's your job?
Yeah. So Jacob, I don't like to give this for this kind of questions like three, four, five answers because it makes easier for me to just pick the five most common ones.
Yeah.
So I rather prefer to say one or two things. In that case, I will say my main function here is to mobilize people.
Okay.
My main function here is to, as soon as we take decisions regarding direction, to mobilize people. So
Okay.
what does it mean from a tactical perspective? It means that I have to know how to communicate. And communication is very simple, just a few things, repetition. So I'm the person that is responsible for this here. Second, It's much easier to mobilize when people have something in common, when behaviors are common. I'm talking about culture. So
Okay.
I'm the one responsible to not allow nobody to negotiate our culture. Our culture, it's our culture. And I can tell you many things that we do here to make it happen. So mobilization is my main function here.
So, can we unpack that a little bit before we go to culture? Because I would imagine that's not just the role of a CEO, but maybe any leader in any company is to mobilize talent. So, what does mobilizing talent actually mean? Um, because you could go down that direction a lot of different ways. So, for you, mobilize talent means what?
Oh, it means make people understand why they have to change their behavior or their mindset and why now.
Okay.
That's for me what is mobilizing. If I don't make you believe on what I'm saying, if I don't make you understand why we are taking this decision, and if I don't make you change as soon as possible, actually my company is slowing down.
Yeah.
So that's the point. And then I come back to communication. And when you study communication, Jacob, psychology teaches you that people are not able to understand if you communicate a lot,
Yeah.
if you communicate too many things, if you write paragraphs. So what we do here, we make everything simple. We choose two, three things max per cycle to communicate. Second, we use a lot of symbols. So why does a brand exist? Because it's a symbol. It makes easier for you to understand. Why do we have signs in the traffic? Because it's easier to understand the message that we want to give to you as a driver. So we bring everything to symbols. And third, frequency. Frequency. I mean,
Yeah.
every single week we have to make the same thing arrive to everybody with the same symbol. And then we measure to see if people are changing. If they are, great. If not, we change the tactics.
So let's unpack that even more. Maybe we can walk through an example. Because you talked about mobilizing is this idea of trying to get people to know why they need to change and explain why now. And
Yeah,
so, do you have an example of maybe a situation, a change that you had to make at iFood and sort of what you did?
yeah, for sure. So I'm gonna give you one good example. When the pandemics came, the company changed the pendulum to one side where we were paying too much attention to our employees, to the people that work here, right? So it of course created a level of comfort. Let me say this, that was okay for the pandemic's time, but it was too much after the pandemic's time.
I love
So
that we're
at that
talking
point,
about this because this is a big debate I have with a lot of HR executives. So, okay,
oh yeah,
I'm excited about this one.
that's great. I mean, before I just continue, I want to say the world works on pendulums. If you
Yes.
don't understand the pendulum, you always will believe that what you decided will have to remain.
Yeah.
We don't believe on that. We love context. So when everything comes back to normality, if I can say that, what we did is to reevaluate. And when we did the reevaluation, many changes came. So at that point in time, what happened is that we have to bring a new symbol to to the culture. And the symbol was grit. When you bring comfort down a bit, actually what you're saying is have more grit. So that's one example. So what we did, we we travel around the globe to understand how to explain grit. And one of the ways to explain this is how the Asian people work, how they are much more keen to work more hours, to go in front of everything and make it happen, and so on and so forth. We brought these symbols. We create a storyline, explain to the entire company for 6 months, and then every month, every Friday, we send a survey where we make 5 questions on Slack. You can just say yes or no, yes or no, yes or no, or 1 to 5. Very simple. And we measure at that point in time grit using these answers. As soon as we saw people changing, we said, okay, I don't need to communicate more of this. I did the mobilization. And then 6 months after a cycle ends, we start to do another thing.
So let's talk about what were some of those things. So during the pandemic, and you're right, I think a lot of companies struggled with this, right? During the pandemic, they said, work anywhere. We're not going to focus so much on performance reviews. We're going to focus on well-being. Work wherever you want. Like, we'll do whatever we can to keep you comfortable and safe and to have a job and stuff like that. And then to your point, post-pandemic, a lot of companies were in trouble. And I've talked to many CHROs who even said, we've invested so much during the pandemic. We gave bonuses to everybody. We gave people $1,500 to spend however they wanted every year. And now, several years after the pandemic, we realize that we're still doing these things, but we're no longer in a pandemic, and employees are used to this stuff. And eventually, what happens is you create this kind of culture where it's not sustainable to keep giving and giving and giving and then to add more and more and more on top of that. So, what were some of the things that you did during the pandemic to create that comfort that you then had to either take away or take a step back from?
Yeah. So can I give you a few examples, Jacob?
Yes.
One of them is when we were at the pandemic. People went home and we didn't know how to train them. So what we did, we got the budget for training and development. We make a calculation and said, now everybody has a quota, right? I mean, you get the entire budget and you divide by 6,000 people. Everybody has a part of it. So why we did that? Because at that point in time, it was difficult, especially in the first 12 months, to understand who I have to develop, which tools do I use, and how I do everything. So I prefer to decentralize the decision by doing this math. When I come back to today, I say, oh, no, 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 no. Now I have a better visibility. Now I know what people are doing, how they are doing. I know how I can train them. So I centralize the budget again, and I choose the people that has to be developed this cycle, and next cycle the other one. And if I have to say somebody, you were not being trained in that sense this cycle, I have to explain. That's how we deal with reality, right? So that's one example. Another example that I can tell you is we gave a lot of benefits to people working at home, including paying for their internet or something like this, right? But see, now we have a flexible format here at iFood. Some people can come, some people can stay at home. If you stay at home and you are not in Sao Paulo, you are making a wage that is on Sao Paulo standards, but you are living in a city that costs much lower. Why do I have to pay your internet? It doesn't make sense. It's a matter of logic. It's not a matter of a right that I was born with. No, no, no. So you don't deserve this anymore. If you're in Sao Paulo, maybe we can talk. If you're not, it doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. So it's your choice. If you want to stay in the countryside, you can, but you don't have access to these benefits anymore.
Yeah, I think most people have a hard time understanding this pendulum because, and this is coming from somebody that writes about employee experience. I think the pendulum swung too much into the hands of employees. Because if you look at a lot of organizations right now, to me, it's crazy that organizations have to convince employees to show up to work, right? So, like Amazon, for example, said that we want employees to be in the office 5 days a week, and their CEO Andy Jassy justified it, and he said it's helping with collaboration, with productivity, with innovation. We believe that going forward, tough times, things are changing. We want to be together to find the best solutions. That should be enough, right? If a CEO comes forward and says that, like, this is the strategic direction of the business and this is kind of what we're doing, for employees to then come back and say, well, I want some data, like, I don't want to come back. I want some data. You have to prove to me why I need to be back in the office. That to me is crazy. And so I think what happened during the pandemic is we put so much power and control in the hands of employees that a lot of leaders are almost scared or uncomfortable to take a stance on certain things and to explain to their employees, like, hey, pandemic is over. Like, we have to get back. Like, this is a job. This is work. Merit. These things are still important. Performance is still important. We need to be back together so that we can, do the things that we need to do. And a lot of employees are freaking out about that, and it's crazy.
But Jacob, let me tell you one thing. This only happens if you don't have a culture established.
Yes, exactly.
Because if your culture says, let's imagine, if your culture says that we have to do that because of these aspects, that's our culture. I mean, if people react against this, you don't have a culture.
Yeah.
So when I started to talk here, I told you, who is iFood? We are a company that is known as a company that don't negotiate our culture. Period.
Yeah.
Or you understand, or you're not here. And you know why? It's not because you're not good. It's not because you're not a great executive or so on and so forth. It's because I tell people in my country, the country has to be built by its own citizens, right? So this is a country in the end. I mean, I'm just creating a symbol here. This is
Yeah.
a country. I need the citizen. Japan is built by Japanese people and not by Australian people. So uh, uh, here we don't have to explain. Of course, that people that get sad, of course, it's part, but it's different being sad versus being resistant, right?
Mm.
I mean, I respect your feelings, but
Yeah.
you have to understand my culture.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You make a very interesting point. I think what happened is a lot of companies had a culture, and then over the past 4 years, they forgot about their culture. They went against their values. They went against their beliefs. They just kind of, we're going to pretend that we're a different company for 4 years. And then after 4 years, we're going to get back to our culture. And a lot of employees are like, wait a minute, like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You're right, they didn't stick to their values. But it's interesting because there were some companies like UPS, which I'm sure you know, United Postal Service.
Yep.
They were very unique because they have hundreds of thousands of employees, and they told their workforce. They said, "Look, even during the pandemic, I talked to their CHRO, Daryl Ford, and he said, look, we are always going to be an in-person company culture first. During the pandemic, we're going to support you. We'll do whatever we need to make sure that you're okay and that you have a job. But after we get through this, make no mistake, this is the culture of the company and we're going to be back." And that's exactly what happened. And they didn't have a lot of pushback and they didn't have a lot of employees going crazy. But then you also had a lot of companies who said, okay, pandemic, we're remote first. We're flexibility first, do whatever. And then pandemic is over. And they're like, wait a minute, we changed our mind. And so they negotiated on their culture, I guess, is what they did, whereas you don't.
Yeah.
So I love that philosophy around not negotiating on culture. So for you at iFood, what is that culture that you don't negotiate on? Like, what are those values? And how do you not negotiate? Like, do you ever get pushback? Do you get employees who challenge you, who disagree with you? And how do you stay firm and not change?
Great. So I can explain you telling four aspects here. First, we are entrepreneurs. We are entrepreneurs, and I like to explain what does mean being an entrepreneur, Jacob, because it's very easy to say, "Come here, it's an entrepreneur culture," and etc. Being an entrepreneur, and you are one, you will understand what I'm saying is having problems 80% of the time, but working so hard on this 80% of the time that the 20% that remains and you are successful is amazing. So be prepared to be under pressure, be prepared to be being criticized in a good sense, always in a good sense. 80% of the time, entrepreneurs, they are never relaxed because we are always aiming something big. That's the
No.
first thing. The second thing is ambidextry, the capacity to manage two opposite things, right? So one good example here is being very analytical. It's easy for some people, and when you demand creativity, they struggle. A good example here is with CFOs. Oh, give me the P&L, the IRR, give me the payback. And then you say, I'm talking about innovation. Show me the IRR. IRR in innovation. I mean, you're asking me to lie to you. So I need ambidextry. The third thing is radical candor. Tell me the truth. If it's not good, it's not good. If I'm slow, tell me that I'm slow. If I'm great, tell me I'm great. That's very, very important for us. And the last thing is dream big. I mean, we are not here just to continue, to keep going.
Yeah.
We are here to continuously trying to create the value that we create for our shareholders, for the society, for ourselves, for everybody.
Are you a chief people officer or a chief human resource officer that is responsible for the future of work and employee experience? If so, then you're going to want to check out futureofworkleaders.com. It's a new global community that I am putting together of the world's top people leaders from brands including Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, Dow, Lego, Tractor Supply, Northrop Grumman, and dozens of others. If you're interested in learning more and requesting an invite, and again, if you are a chief human or chief people officer, then head on over to futureofworkleaders.com. So when you don't negotiate on them, I guess maybe it's important to understand how those things come to life inside of iFood.
Yep.
And then do you have any stories or examples of when people pushed back on them? And like, how do you just say, nope, we don't negotiate on our culture, that's it? Like, how do you deal with any resistance if you've ever had it?
Yeah. So what we do is the following. Every Friday, people got a survey, very small one, in their Slack. So there's a bot that goes in 100% of the employees. They get this
Okay.
every Friday. Once a month, I sit down with my team and I see the results and I see where I'm having pushbacks. And I go straight to the point. So in that department, in that specific team, in that cell, and I go there and I talk to the leader and I talk to the teams and I sit down and I explain why and I explain what will happen if we don't move forward.
Hmm.
I explain. So instead of just going to Slack, publishing a video to 6,000 people, no, I go there and I talk to the 20, 30, 40 people of that cell, 100 people of that department, and so on and so forth. So I can give you an example. Uh, one day I did a change here. I decided to shut down an office in the countryside of Brazil. And why? Because we opened that to be close to a very important university here. But what happened is that as soon as people finish the college, they move. So they didn't stay in that city. So we were not able to use the office for this. But some people that live it around like it, the office, and like it to go there and study and work. At a certain point, I decided to shut down the office.
Hmm.
I sent a message and I started to see some pushbacks against this, right? People complaining because we were not being empathetic with people that were using the office. So
Hmm.
I called them, like 12 people, and I said, let me explain one thing. The objective was this. We are not reaching the objective. Even though I understand the importance to you, it's not important to the company. Does it make sense for you? And the person
Yeah.
said, yes. So if it makes sense, the only thing I expect from you is move forward. Continue to complain when makes sense doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Can we agree on that? Yes. And that's what I expect from people from now on.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that approach. So you kind of go to where the issue is and kind of not debate it, but kind of address it head on.
Yes. The root cause.
Yeah, the root cause. Yeah, that's. I think it's a pretty good approach, and I'm also really interested in this kind of the 6 month change that you made. You called it where you were talking about these symbols that you brought back from Asian countries around grit and how you instilled that into iFood. So, how often do you do that? Do you do that, for example, anytime you need to make a culture change? Because grit isn't one of like those values that you shared, but it's also I don't know, what would you call it? It's more of a
The
philosophy.
behavior.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a behavior. Yeah. So, how often do you do this process of identifying a behavior that you think is maybe lacking that you need to bring in and trying to infuse it in the company? And do you only do one behavior at a time?
Yeah. We do that every 6 months.
Oh, okay.
The output is I can change to a new one, or I can continue to work with the one that I was previously working. So we stop every 6 months, analyze, we talk to the leadership. I go by myself to some teams. I try to grab this information and we reach a conclusion and again we start to work on this.
Hmm.
Uh, there's a maximum of three, let me say, aspects that we communicate, right? Maximum of three. We don't, I mean, it's not about if I believe or not. Psychology shows that the more you add, the more you lose the
Yeah.
capacity of people understanding what you're trying to say. So we work with at max three aspects or behaviors or ways of doing and so forth per cycle.
Hmm. And how do you identify what these are?
How do I identify what?
What those behaviors are going to be?
Oh, so what we do is we get that interviews that I told you, the surveys that we do by Slack.
Okay.
Uh, by myself, I have some blocks on my agenda where I just use my time to talk to people that are well known people for being very close to our culture, and I see what they are feeling. So there's a group of 30, 40 people more or less
Okay.
that we consider the ones that really represents my culture. So I talk to them, I listen to them, and I see how they are feeling. So with
Hmm.
this data plus this feelings, I take the decision together with the HR department.
Okay. And then after you identify it, let's say it's grit. Like, what were some of the other ones that you did besides grit, by the way, just so we can get a couple examples?
Oh, we already worked with innovation. So at a certain point, we saw that the company was plateauing, right?
Okay.
So we were not able to release as much as we did in the past. So we said, okay, how do we come back to the level of innovation that we are doing? So, and this involves behavior, people acting and reacting in process, in committees, or things like this that we need to change to allow the company to innovate more. So that's another example. A
Okay.
third example here was we have a say here at iFood that is care to dare, right? So we really believe that the more I care, the more are I there. But don't misunderstand. Care doesn't mean give you all the benefits that people may be thinking.
Okay.
Care means respect, listening. Care means understanding what is going on, and so on and so forth. At a certain point, we saw that the company was too focused on daring, and therefore I was losing part of the quality of my environment.
Hmm.
So one cycle we work with care to there, and so on and so forth.
And then how do you then bring it to life? So in the case of grit, and so I'm thinking, let's say there's a leader watching this, whether it's a leader of a team or function or what company, and they identify, okay, this is sort of the behavior that I want to instill or bring to life over the next 6 months. I've identified what it is. Did you offer training on it? Was it just communicating? Like, how did you teach grit for 6 months? What did that look like?
Great. So the first thing we do, Jacob, is the same reevaluation that we are talking here. I do for other aspects of the business, and every 6 months we get 250, 300 senior leaders, and we go to a place to spend 4 days.
Okay.
What do I do during 4 days? I explain the whys, and I explain the roles that they have to make us make that change, or to push things that we need in the next 6 months. So what I'm telling is, with the senior leadership, I spend a lot of time convincing them on how to convince people. So I mean, it's not about me only, right? So that's what I start
Okay.
working here. The second thing is, we do and we call all faces every month. So we have like a 3 hours meeting with the entire company every month for 3 hours. Every month, the first 15 minutes of the agenda, it's only about talking about each change. So if I have two changes, 30 minutes. If I have three changes, 45 minutes. During 6 months, every month we talk about this. The third thing is, we bring opinion leaders that when you look to them, you say, okay, I respect this guy about this aspect. And why this? Again, comes back to psychology. If I bring Barack Obama to say something, if I bring Donald Trump to say other thing, it's natural that your brain respect one thing in Barack Obama, another thing in Donald Trump. It's just because that's how the brain works. So we bring
Yeah.
people that has this capacity to speed up this process of you accepting the change. So we bring them, and especially in the first 3 months, we have many sessions with people here and there to make them start to believe. So with that we close.
Okay.
So we change the leadership. We communicate frequently every month. We bring opinion leaders. And the fourth thing, just to close, I forget that we create symbols we put in the entire company, and people see the symbols. They see in shirts, they see on the floor, they see everywhere. They keep remembering that they have to think about X.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's an analogy to something else like that that I've seen. Again, because I work with a lot of companies. I haven't seen any company take that particular approach of like 6 month behavior sprints and break it down into those different components of stories, of interviews, of talking about it. I actually think that's very interesting. It's a very, very unique approach. I mean, you're kind of treating your company like, I don't know. I guess it's an acknowledgement that culture and behaviors and values can change and adapt, and that you constantly have to adapt with it. Whereas what happens to a lot of companies is they set these things and then they never change. They pick their values or whatever 10 years ago and they put them on the walls of their company and it stays like that forever. And they don't, they forget about the behaviors that attach to the values. So I really like that kind of idea of a
Yeah.
sprint.
Jacob, just to make a comment about this, if you don't do something like this, and doesn't mean it is to be similar to us, you don't understand what does mean context.
Yeah.
Context is everything, and every time that context change, and it changes, I don't know, every year, every 6 months, every 18 months, it demands you a different approach. Let me give you another example here. When competition was coming to Brazil as a consequence of the zero interest rate period, like
Okay.
2018 to
Yep. Yep.
2021, what we said here, we are at war. You have to be prepared as warriors are. How do they do? How do they work? How much are they alert, and so on and so forth. So it's different when you are not living in a zero interest period. So you need to make people understand. We use it to get like some like big pictures of warriors and put all around the office. At a certain point, some person come and say, "Oh, this is dangerous. Don't do that anymore." People are thinking that they have to fight and things like this, and of course we react accordingly. But that's what I'm saying. I mean, there's always a context where you have to put your mind on it.
Yeah. And maybe one more question before we jump to the action items around lifelong learning. So that's how you mobilize. And you said the second piece of this is convince people why now. So how do you do that part? Because, that's the sense of urgency, the communicating the change. How do you communicate that sense of urgency, especially for other leaders? Because oftentimes what I see inside of companies is employees other leaders will say, we should do this. And then one of their peers will say, yeah, but we don't need to do it now. It's not a priority. We can do it in 6 months next year. Where does the urgency come from? The why now?
I always explain the why now with stories.
Okay.
Stories make people understand why somebody did right or why somebody did wrong. So let me give you one example. If you didn't have the chance to read, I recommend you to read Read Refresh from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft.
Okay.
So he tells basically where Microsoft was and when he took over, what he changed it to bring Microsoft to where it is. And you may say, oh, but it's Satya Nadella talking about himself. But don't forget that he's criticizing Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates, who are in the board, right? So it's like a very interesting book. Uh, and there he explains, for example, why the company was plunging and what he changed it to make the company be alive. So when I get this example and when I get the example of BlackBerry and I explain people these two stories, they understand the why now. Because the inflection point The why now is the inflection point, right? If you tell two stories where you show what happens in that inflection point, people can realize the consequence, the positive and negative consequences. So that's how I make people understand. I tell stories.
Yeah. Yeah, the story it's almost a little bit of a lost art, the idea of telling stories. So I like that you mentioned that. I think that's super important. Let's shift gears a little bit because I know we only have like 10, 15 minutes left, and we're going to go to the Leaders Toolkit section where we talk about something specific that people can do. And here we're going to talk about lifelong learning because it's very important, and a lot of people talk about it, but very few people maybe do it. Everybody says they do it. So, A, what does lifelong learning mean to you? And do you have any strategies for how you actually put it into practice to go beyond just
Yep.
words? All right, everyone, my conversation with Diego continues only if you are a premium subscriber of Future Ready Leadership Plus on Apple Podcasts. And in this bonus episode, we're going to be talking about how to be a lifelong learner. And a lot of people talk about that, but very few people actually do it in a structured, specific way. And Diego's going to share his process for being a lifelong learner, which is very unique. I actually haven't heard a lot of people talk about it the way that Diego does, but he takes it very, very seriously, very structured. It's almost like a formula that he uses on a regular basis every few months to learn a new topic and what he does and how he absorbs that information. So if you want to get access to that and learn that framework, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And when you become a subscriber, not only do you get ad-free listening, but you get one of these bonus episodes every single week. How could you possibly say no? So thank you so much for tuning, for listening in. Also, if you want to get access to the newsletter, go to thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And you can get access to that there. We release the episodes, the transcripts, all that sort of fun stuff. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.